Hilchos Tumas Meis, Perek Arba ve'Esrim, the laws of corpse impurity, chapter 24. I'm going to begin today with a very important message that's not Rambam related, and it's particularly addressed to the online viewership of these classes, even though it's also addressed to those that are here in person. For the next few weeks, Chabad of Sherman Oaks is running our annual fundraising campaign. We're raising $400,000 so we can keep providing all that we provide to the Jewish community, including these classes. And the way it works is like many campaigns work nowadays, where it's doubled. We have generous matchers. Every donation that you put in online is matched. So if you visit ChabadSO, ChabadSO.com/give, it'll bring you directly to our campaign page, where you can please contribute from the kindness of your heart, especially if you're able to give monthly. That's a huge difference in support. One-time contribution is one thing, but monthly giving is a whole other level. And it would mean the world if some of our online viewers, and you could pass it on to your friends as well, would spread the word about this campaign so we can end the year as we should and begin the new year as we should, confident in the fact that we have funding from our local donors who believe in our vision and share our values, so we can continue doing the work that we do. All right, and with that, we go to the Rambam. We are in the discussion of Oyhel, the idea that Tumah spreads from a corpse to everywhere in the room. Particularly, we're talking about the saving side, the fact that certain mechanisms allow the Tumah to be saved and not to spread into certain areas, like tzamid pasil, a tight covering, or an oyhel, a tent within a tent, or balua if something is absorbed. Today and tomorrow's chapter, which close out these laws, seem to be somewhat of an addendum to that concept. Other scenarios where it's tzamid pasil-like, similar concept to a tight covering, which seal off the tumah, don't allow them to go to the next part of the room or to the next room. Primarily, we're going to be dealing with partitions, mechitzas. What happens if you have a source of impurity and there's a partition blocking? Can the tumah cross the partition? What happens if you have a source of impurity inside a partition, particularly inside a wall of a home? How does that affect the contents of the home? That's going to be the main subject of today's chapter. The Rambam begins with the following scenario. Halacha Aleph, bayis shechilkoi bekankanim tehoros. A home, basically a room, because most of the homes in those days were studio apartments, one-room homes. A home that was split with pure jugs. And the commentaries say we're talking about pottery jugs. Min ha'aretz v'ad ha'koira, from the ground to the roof. V'tuma b'chetzi ha'echad. And there is a source of impurity in one half of the room. So here you have the wall of pottery jugs, and there's a source of impurity right over here. Now, one thing we know about pottery is that, unlike any other utensil, it only contracts impurity from its airspace. So only if its mouth is open to the source of impurity will it become impure. Once something becomes impure, it can no longer serve as a blocker. Therefore, says the Rambam, im haya pia kankanim, kalapi atara, if the mouth of the jugs in this case were all facing the pure side of the room, not the side where the corpse is, hare elu matziles, then the wall of jugs saves the inner half of the room or the other half of the room from the corpse tumah spreading to there, because the jugs remain pure and they're a good blocker. Whereas if the mouths of the jugs were facing the source of impurity, if the corpse were here and the mouths were open to this side, so all the jugs are becoming impure and therefore they cannot be blockers. So then, einon matzilos, they don't save the rest of the room, and let's say there were utensils over here, they would also become impure because of the corpse impurity. That's the standard explanation of the Rambam. The commentaries deal with the question that we've seen a couple times already, that even if you have a utensil which is pure, a utensil cannot become an oyel. A utensil cannot become enough of a tent to block tumah from going through it. So even in the scenario where the mouths were facing away from the person, why should that law be different? Why should they be a blocker? Number of suggestions in the commentary. Some say that all the times we learned that a kli, a utensil, cannot be an oyel, is if the tumah is spreading upwards or downwards. Here, when tumah is spreading sideways, for whatever reason, sideways spreading is different. Others say that in a certain way, this law is a lift-off from the last chapter about tzamid pasil. In a certain way, this partition is like, kind of like, remember the case in yesterday's chapter with the two stories? There was a roof and then there was a pot in the middle. The pot itself acted like a tzamid pasil to everything on top of it. So in this way also, the partition acts like a tight covering to everything that's beyond it. And therefore, in this case, it seals off the entire room, and everything past the corpse or past the partition is not going to be affected by the corpse. And there are other ways to deal with this. Again, if you know something from online, love to hear about it in the comments. Now says the Rambam, consider the following scenario. And the simple meaning of this will be in a case where the mouths of the jugs were open to the impurity. Says the Rambam, the mouths of the jugs were open to the impurity, and you did another step. Tachan betit. You sealed, or you layered, all the area of the partition with clay. As in this picture. Here the jugs are all open to where the corpse impurity is, and you covered it with a layer of clay. Bein mi bifnim, whether you did it like this, you put the layer of clay on the inside. Bein mi bachutz, but even if you did it on the outside, same case, the mouths are open to the impurity, and the layer of clay is in the back of the jugs. The question now is, yes, granted, that in the case where the mouths of the jugs were open to the corpse, they don't serve as a partition, but now you have an additional partition. You have a layer of clay, wherever the layer of clay might be, behind the jugs, in front of the jugs, but maybe the layer of clay itself could be the partition. Says the Rambam, we have to examine. And we had a similar case in chapter 15 when it came to the window. When you have two elements to a partition, you have to check. If we would remove the jugs, could the layer of clay be sturdy enough to stand on its own? Matzil. Then it saves the other half of the room, the corpse impurity doesn't pass to the other half. But if not, it doesn't save the other half. It's all under one tent, because the jugs aren't blockers, and the layer of clay isn't sturdy enough on its own to stand. So there is no blocker. So if there's no blocker, everything's in the one tent, everything becomes impure. Now again, the way I explained it is that in this scenario we're talking about where the mouths of the jugs are facing the corpse. Some commentaries say it could even be a case where the mouths of the jugs were facing away from the corpse, where anyway the partition is strong enough. So why is the layer of clay required? Because there is a case where it's not strong enough. If you put the jugs in a room and you didn't have in mind to leave them there, then the jugs on their own are not powerful enough to be blockers. The question is, if you added a layer of clay, is that powerful enough? And that's where the Rambam says, if it's 30% on its own, then yes. If not, then not. Halacha Beis, let's examine another type of partition in the home. Bayis shechilkoi b'nisarim. You have a home which you divided with boards, oy b'yiriyos, or with curtains. All the pictures I have are going to be with boards, but imagine that all the same applies to curtains. Im chilkoi min hatzdodin, and we're referring to whether you divided it from the side, meaning you hung up, so to speak, the board, standing upright. So they divided the room into two rooms. Oy mikalape hakoides, or you did so parallel to the roof beams. You put the board straight across the room. Now the truth is, in chapter 20, we already had a similar case to this. And the Rambam didn't call that mikalape hakoides, he called that mikalape artzoi. You divided the room towards the ground. And that's because in chapter 20, and the Rambam will soon mention this, we're talking about where you put the partition lower, closer to the ground, so that the upper part was the main feature of the room, and the bottom part covered by the board was the oihel that was created. Here it's the opposite. You're putting the board closer to the roof, and therefore the portion that's on top of the board becomes like the side element where the oihel is, and the main area is the bottom part. That's what we're talking about. So we're talking about a room that's divided either this way, with the board closer to the roof, or, again, classically, partition standing upright. V'hoisa hatuma babayis. And the case is that the tuma was in the main part of the home. So not the inner part of the room which you partitioned off, or in this scenario, not in the upper part. The tuma was in the lower part, what's called the bayis. So then, kelim sheben ha-mechitza o ben ha-kaisa. Any utensils between the partition and the wall. First case, right? The inner half of the room. Oy sheben ha-mechitza v'ha-kaidas. Or, going back to this picture, any utensils between the board and the roof beams, tohidin, they are pure. Because they're in a separate area, and the partition is a powerful partition to block off the tuma from spreading there. However, hoisa hatuma bein mechitza la-kaisa. If the impurity was in the inner half of the room, the corpse is between the partition to the wall, or bein mechitza la-kaidas, or in the other scenario, it's between the area of the roof beams, from the board to the roof beams, then that means the tuma is in the oihel, the tuma is in the secondary tent area, so to speak. And then we already had the law about this, kelim shebabayis tmeim, the law of the utensils in the main part of the home, the lower part or the outer half of the room, that's going to be impure. Because a partition cannot stop impurity from leaving and making these things in the main area impure, as we explained in the oihel that's within a home, a regular tent covering in a home. If something's in a covering, so if the tumah is outside, it won't go in. But if the tumah is inside, it will definitely go out. And this upper part is called the oihel, or the inner part of the room is called the oihel. So the tumah will spread from the oihel to the main part of the room. What if the utensils were in the thickness of the partition? So here I put it between two boards, not fully accurate. It would mean it's a thick board and there's a utensil in the board, in the thickness of the partition. Doesn't matter where the impurity was, in the inside or on the outside. We have to examine the space where the utensils are. If the place occupied by the utensils was a hollowed space in the board, in the partition, that occupied a tefach by a tefach cubed, tmeim, then they are impure. Why are they impure? Because when they have a tefach by a tefach of space, they become their own entity. They don't become part of the board. And when the tumas spreads, while it doesn't affect the partition itself, but it will spread through any spaces that are in the partition, including this tefach by a tefach occupied by the kelim. V'im lav. But if there isn't a tefach of space there, then they become part of the wall. The wall itself can never become impure. Toheidim, therefore the utensils also are pure. Ukvar bi'arnu, and we already explained, says the Rambam, Keitzad din habayis, what will be the law of the house, in chilka miklape artzai, if you divided it with a board closer to the ground. It's the opposite of what the law is when you put the board closer to the roof. Because now the bottom part becomes the oil. So if Tumas in the bottom part, it spreads to the top part, whereas Tumas in the top part, it doesn't spread to the bottom part, as we had in chapter 20. Halacha Gimel, Bayis Shehu Mali Tevin. Let us look at this scenario where we have a home that's full of straw, full of hay. There isn't even, between the top of the pile and the roof beams, a space of a tefach. It's literally full from floor to ceiling. Now in the commentaries, there are two general approaches to this case. One is, like as it's pictured here, that everything opposite the doorway is empty though. The straw pile begins after the doorway, from floor to ceiling, but the whole area in front of the doorway is cleared. Others say that the Rambam is referring to a case where the entire room is sealed except for the actual space of the doorway. But either way, the Rambam says, when you have no space of a tefach between the top of the straw pile and the top of and the roof, tuma bifnim, if there's a source of impurity inside the pile, bein b'seicha teven, bein shayisa, bein teven l'kairis, whether actually inside the straw pile or above the straw pile where there's less than a tefach of space, kol ha'kelim, shekeneged yitzias hatuma, any utensils that are opposite the place of the tuma's exit, bimloya shel pesach, in the place filled by the doorway, which either again only means the hollow area or the entirety of the area in front of the doorway, tmeim, it's impure. Because what happens is we consider this entire straw pile to be nullified to the house. It's like an object inside of an oil. We ignore it, and then we just say there's tuma in the home. If there's tuma in the home, tuma spreads to the entire home. Hoisa tuma chutz lateven bimloya shel pesach. If the impurity was outside of the straw pile, in the area filling the doorway, which again either means just the hollow or everywhere across the doorway, kelim shebifnim, then as far as utensils go inside the straw pile, im yesh bim kaiman tefach al tefach arun tefach, here it's the opposite of the partition. If the space that the kelim occupies is a tefach cubed, tohidim, they become their own entity and they're pure, they're saved. V'im lav, if not, tmeim, they're just part of the rest of the home and they become impure. But all of these cases are only said if the straw pile reaches all the way to the roof. However, if there's a tefach of space between the top of the straw pile and the roof beams, so then, in any scenario, wherever the kelim are, in the tefach of cube space and not, they're always impure. Because in this case, straw is not considered a blocker. When you have a pile of straw, by default, you're going to move it away. Once you put it all the way up to the roof, you've shown that you're nullifying it here. But if you're leaving a tefach of space like classic straw piles, you haven't nullified it. So therefore, it's always considered to be as though non-existent relative to the home. There's just tuma in the home. Tuma spreads to the entire home, and everything is impure. Halacha dalet. We're going to consider now, for a while, dealing with this concept, a wall between two homes. Here's one home, here's a second home, and we're looking at the wall between the homes. Vituma b'soicha koisel. And there's a source of impurity inside the wall. It's not clear in this picture. Don't think that this corpse flesh is outside of the wall. It's stuck in the wall somewhere along the thickness of the wall. So how do we decide which house the corpse tuma belongs to? It's a wall that's shared by two homes. So the Rambam says, a principle which we're going to learn again and again in this chapter, it's all about which direction it's closer to. Bayis hakorev la tuma tame. The home closer to the source of impurity is impure. Tuma, in this case, will spread here. The hakorev la tara toher. But the home that's closer to the purity will be pure. So in this case, right home is impure, left home is pure. Let's say it was this case, the corpse tuma was on the other side. That home will be impure, and this home will be pure. If it was exactly half and half, shneihen tmein, then they're both going to be impure because we're going to attach it to both sides. And there's a debate in the commentaries if this is a biblical law or a rabbinic stringency. Either way, that is the law. Now, I should say that there's some discussion as far as the location of this impurity. So the classic approach is that the tuma, this corpse flesh inside the wall, is ritzutza. It has to be cramped. It cannot have a tefach of space. If it did, the whole wall would become like a grave. Same way when you have a grave, the walls of the grave all around make you tameh because they're hosting a corpse. So here, if there would be a tefach of space, it'd be like a corpse buried in a grave and the whole wall would become impure. However, others say no. In this scenario, even if there was tefach of space, it would not become a grave. A grave is when the walls were created to host the corpse. Here the wall was for the home. Corpse flesh landed in there later. You can't consider it a host to the corpse, so it wouldn't have the law of a grave. But again, the classic way is the first way, that it's ritzutza, it's cramped in a space that's less than a tefach by a tefach. At any rate, we say, closer to here, closer to there, that's what dictates the impurity, unless it's half and half. What if, however, it wasn't the impurity in the home, in the wall, the impurity was in the home. The corpse was lying in one of the homes, and the utensils are inside the wall. So, same rules. Once you're talking about the half of the wall, closer to the impurity, if the utensils are here, they're going to be impure. However, if they're on this side, they're in the half towards the pure side, they're not near the corpse, they're going to be pure. If they're exactly halfway through the thickness of the wall, they're going to become impure because the tumah will spread, at least to the halfway point, including where the utensils are. This is all true of a wall between two homes. What if we have a similar concept, a layer of mud between two stories? As was customary in those days, roofs were composed of two parts. There was roof beams that you would lie down one next to another, and then there was a layer of coating on top, made up of a whole bunch of different entities, mud, clay, mortar. It all became together to be a ma'aziva, a layer of coating. So the Rambam says that the same laws will apply. Same thing if you have a ma'aziva, a layer of coating between the lower story and the upper story, and we have a source of impurity, a corpse flesh, inside the coating. If it's in the lower half of the coating, so the lower floor is impure. Anything in the top floor is pure. If it's in the upper half, here it is, then the upper house, the upper story is impure, the bottom story is pure. If it's exactly half and half, shneim tmeim, they're both going to be impure, because again, the half-half scenario is always ruled stringently. And what if it wasn't the impurity in the coating, it was the impurity outside of the coating? If impurity was in one of the homes, we'll call it on the lower floor, and the kelim b'seicha ma'aziva, with utensils inside the coating, same rules. If they're in the half, closer to the impurity, they're impure. Even though kelim are saved in a tzamid pasul, in a tight covering, this layer of mud is not called a tight covering. It's not even an oil, it's just mud. Therefore, they get affected by the corpse and they become impure. But if it's in the upper half, towards the purity area, they're pure. If it's exactly half-half, so most Rambams here have the words shnehem tmeim, they're both impure. But both is more appropriate when we're talking about both floors. Here, the commentary is corrected to harehein tmeim. The utensils that are sitting half and half will become impure. Okay. This whole discussion concerned a layer of coating between two stories. What if we now move it to a one-story home? Hoysa hamaziva la'avir. The layer of coating was open to the airspace. Betuma besoicha, and there's impurity in the layer of coating. So obviously the only room that it's going to be affecting is the room on bottom of it. But there could be a scenario where there'll be a guy on top of it, and we have to know if he's going to get affected. So, says the Rambam as follows. If the coating was open to the airspace, and there was impurity inside of it, if it's in the lower half, so the home gets affected. Tumas spreads to the entire home. And the person standing on top of the roof, afilu keneged hatuma, even if he's standing directly above the corpse flesh, tahar, he'll be pure. Shahare pashta hatuma b'chalabayis, because in this scenario, the tumah has already spread to the entirety of the home. It will not spread upwards, which raises a major question that David brings up. This is tumah ritzutza. This is cramped impurity. Cramped impurity always goes all the way up and all the way down. So if a person is right on top of it, it should certainly affect him. Why isn't the tumah affecting him? The Kesef Mishnah here brings up a novel idea that he repeats again later, and we'll soon see about this. He says tumah ritzutza, cramped impurity, is only when the impurity is cramped in one entity, in the ground, in a wall. This layer of coating is not one entity. It's a whole hodgepodge of a bunch of things. That's not called cramped impurity. It doesn't have that law. So as long as the tumah is spreading downwards, it will not spread upwards. On the other hand, if the impurity of the corpse flesh was in the upper half of the layer of coating, habayis tahar, so it won't spread to the home. Anything in the home will be pure. Anybody standing above, opposite the impurity, will be impure. Mechza, if it's half and half, habayis tameh, both the home is impure. And the person standing above will also be impure, because you cannot be exact. Can't be precise. If it's half-half, it's got to be leaning towards somewhere. So out of doubt, I must be stringent and make both of them impure. Halacha hey, same way we have it when it comes to a roof that is serving a home. The chen koisel hamishamesh hasabayis. Same thing if you have a wall that is serving a home. And we're not talking about a standard wall. We're talking about a wall that we'll see in a moment is not attached to the roof directly. But it's serving the home in the sense that it was structured around the home. So it's treated like a roof. Yidin mechza lemechza, it has the same laws as the half-half concept. That the space of the impurity will determine whether the home is impure as follows. Ketzad, what does this look like? Koisel shehula avir, you have a wall open to the air. The gag habayis samuch la koisel, the einim murkav ala koisel. But the roof of the home is next to the wall, but not riding over the wall as was customary. They would lay the roof beams over the walls. Here not. Here it came just up to the wall, not the wall. The wall itself is open to the airspace. The top of the wall is open to the sky. The tumah ritzutza b'soicha koisel. And there is tumah cramped inside the wall. Again, don't be fooled by the picture. The tumah is somewhere along the wall. It's not just sticking outside of the wall. So what do we do? Wrong picture. Here. If it's on the inner half of the wall, habayis tamei, so the home is impure because the tumah spreads to the home. But if somebody were standing on top of the roof, on top of the wall here, they'd be pure. Just like if you were standing on top of the roof and it was in the inner half, only the home is affected and not him. But if it was on the outer side of the wall, so habayis tar, the home is pure, it doesn't affect the home. And if somebody stands above, opposite the impurity, they'll become impure. Because in this case, tumah did not spread outside, and it's like sitting in the wall. It's like a grave, essentially. It's like you're standing on top of a grave. And so, you are going to become impure. What if the impurity was exactly half and half? So here, interestingly, habayis tameh, the home is impure, but the person standing on top is pure. Because the impurity spread to the home. Now by the roof, we didn't say that. By the roof, when it was half-half, we spread it both ways. Here we don't. Commentaries say, v'tzarich tam lazeh. We need a reason for this distinction, but there obviously is a distinction between a wall and a roof. Just got to figure out what it is. So if you have any comments or opinions from the online viewership, please, I'd love to know about it. Interesting case. What happens if you took off some of the wall from the inside? Or maybe you added to the wall from the outside. And now, because of the addition, the tumah is in the inner half. Without the addition, tumah is in the outer half of the wall. Now that you added this part, the tumah becomes in the inner half. Well, it's all about where the tumah is. Now that it's in the inner half, habayis tamei, the home becomes impure. Same thing if, not only b'chutz, you took off some of the wall of the outside, or you added to the wall's thickness on the inside, to the point that the impurity is now found on the outer half of the wall. Good for you. Habayis tar, the home is pure. If the impurity is standing on top of this wall, that's really kind of standing alone, not attached to the roof. Even if it's in the inner half, that part of the wall is not serving the home. And therefore, habayis Torah, the home is completely pure. Halacha vav. In the last halacha, the Rambam called this wall a koisel mishamesh habayis, a wall serving the home, because it was made to help the home. What if you have bayis hamishamesh hakoisel? You have a home that's actually serving the wall. In other words, the wall wasn't constructed. It was the homes or the rooms that were constructed, and the wall came about automatically. As we'll give a case in a moment of where you dug 2 holes in the ground. You dug 2 holes in the ground, right away you have a wall between them. So here, the law of half-half doesn't apply. Rather, yidain keklipas hashum. It is judged by the rule of a garlic peel. What does a garlic peel mean? It means that as long as there's a blockage of a garlic peel's thickness from between the tuma and the utensils, the tuma doesn't spread. Ketzad, what's an example of this? A person digs two graves. Or two caves, one next to the other, to the point that you now find two homes, two rooms dug into the ground. And between them becomes automatically a wall dividing between them. And there was impurity in one of the homes, one of the graves. There's a corpse in a grave, it's pretty normal. And there was utensils in the wall between them. So it doesn't matter which half it is. If there's an interruption between them, the thickness of a garlic peel, the impurity doesn't spread. The kelim are pure. If there was impurity in between them, I'm not sure why there's a corpse right in between the graves. The kelim babatim and utensils in the homes, again in the graves. So again, doesn't matter inner half, outer half. If there's an interruption between the corpse and the grave, the garlic peel's thickness, the utensils are pure, tuma doesn't pass through. So in summary, behold, you learn, when we're talking about a constructed wall, the laws of tuma in the wall go half-half. Whichever half they're closer to, that's the half that they make impure. But if you have bedrock wall, or it becomes out of the clod of earth, when you dig this side and that side, it's judged by the rules of the garlic peel. Tiniest amount of interruption creates an interruption, a partition, and tuma doesn't pass through. What if you have a wall which is half constructed and half bedrock? It follows the walls of construction, and they go with the laws of half-half. Closer to here is impure, closer to there, that side is impure. Impurity, corpse flesh, let's call it, that was in between the beams of a home. That's the literal meaning. You had a bunch of beams, and the space between the beams, tuma is in that space. However, the Rambam, as the commentaries explain it, is not referring to that case. When he says bain means inside. There was impurity inside one of the beams. So even though we just said 2 halachas ago, 3 halachas ago, that when it comes to a roof, the coating of the roof, we go half and half. The roof beams, we don't go half and half. We go with the laws of garlic peel. That means even if under the corpse flesh, all there is left of the beam is a garlic peel size, habayis tar, the home is pure. And we treat the tuma as if it's cramped in the ground, cramped in the beam. And it only makes impure that which is exactly opposite it. It doesn't spread to the rest of the home. What is the difference between the roof beam and the roof coating? So the Kesef Mishnah brings up his point again. A roof beam is one entity. Tuma can be cramped in there. The roof layer of coating, that's not one entity, it's a bunch of different particles. As other commentaries put it, the ma'aziva can crumble. The coating can crumble and the tuma will just be left. The beam is not crumbling, the beam is one thing. And therefore tuma can be cramped inside of it. It will only make impure what's exactly opposite it. However, if the beam is a thick beam, and where the corpse flesh is cramped, there's a tefach by a tefach of space, hakol tamei, then everything is impure. Why? It's like a grave. The whole beam around it is like a grave hosting the piece of corpse flesh. That's one interpretation of these words. Kesef Mishnah, however, writes that the imyesh b'mekayma doesn't mean in the place of the corpse flesh. It means the beam itself. If the beam itself is a tefach wide, then hakol tamei, then everything is impure because it becomes an oil and it spreads the impurity to everything around it. And so too, if the corpse flesh could be seen in the home, now we don't mean seen in the home as in literally open. If it's open, of course, it makes the whole home impure. The Rambam writes in the commentary to the Mishnah that this means there was a glass layer. Very interesting concept. Today it's pretty common. You put a glass partition, you can see through it. I don't know how common it was in those days, but the Rambam talks about it. You have this roof beam with a layer of glass, and you can see inside the glass there's a piece of corpse flesh. Then in any case, the home is impure. We don't consider it to be an interruption. The tumah spreads into the house. And the final case that Rambam deals with is shnei psachim zeh al gabi zeh. You have two doorways, one on top of the other. The tumah b'koisel shebeneyan, with corpse flesh impurity in the wall between them. So why are there two doorways on top of each other? So I guess the straightforward interpretation is that it's really two stories. There should be like let's say a staircase over here. One door goes into the first story, one door goes into the second story. Other commentaries write that people in those days, for whatever reason, design, they like to have their homes to be symmetrical. So if on the other side of this home, there was two doorways, one leading to a first story, leading to a second story, and the other side of the home, in this side, they would design into the wall what looked like doorways. Just two indents into the wall to make the design look symmetrical. That's what we're talking about over here. And we want to know, how does this wall relate to the space that's created by this indent and the space by this indent? What if there's kalim here? What if there's kalim here? So, it basically goes like this. If the tuma can be seen inside one of them, that means it's kind of peeking out from the wall into the space in this indent, or the space of this indent, hu tamei v'chaveirei tahor. The one that it's peeking into is impure, the other one is pure. V'im lav, if not, if it's literally in the wall, nidainin mechza lemechza, they go half-half. In other words, same way when it came to the actual thickness of the wall, in terms of whether the room is going to be affected or not. We go half-half this way. For these two doorways, we go half-half this way. If it's closer to this door, that one's impure and this one's pure. If it's closer to that door, that one's impure and that one's pure. If it's exactly half-half, then we go half-half, and both of them are unfortunately impure. We finish on a positive note, everything should be pure.